The first question that we'll solve today is this one, right? Which we briefly discussed yesterday, but we obviously, but we could not complete that. Okay, now have a look at this. Large organizations face no competition. There is therefore no choice. Small competitive businesses are a better means of providing for consumers' need. Do you agree with this argument, right? Now, what this statement is telling us, or what this statement is trying to, make us discuss, is that for larger organizations where there are few firms in the market, there will be lesser choice for the consumers, and therefore when there's lesser choice, there is lesser competition, and therefore consumer needs will not be met in a very effective manner, right? Or consumer needs will not be met, like prices might be very high, or there might not be choice, there might not be efficiency, quality might not be good, and all these things. On the other hand, for smaller and competitive markets, like perfect competition, right, there will be more choice, more brands, lower prices, better quality, and all these things. Do we agree with this? Do we disagree with this? To what extent do we agree? To what extent do we disagree? So the first thing that you need to remember, that for all such questions, there will always be two sides of the argument. There will always be two sides of the argument. Preet, have a look at this. So let's first, right? Okay. So let's first put the question here. Okay. Now let's get started here. Preet. Okay. Now, first thing, this is what we need to discuss. Larger organizations, or how do larger organizations compare with smaller organizations in terms of providing consumer needs, right? So this is a simple statement that I have rephrased, the same statement that the above question asks us, but I have just rephrased it to sound it more simpler, right? How do larger organizations compare with smaller organizations in terms of providing for consumer needs, right? Now, this is the question that we need to answer, right? Now, think about this. Larger organizations with lesser competition. This should be obvious for you to understand, because think about this. What's the pattern? The pattern is, in perfect competition, there are a lot of firms, but every firm has small market share. Yes or no? Because think about this market, whatever market you think of, right? If multiple firms are operating there and a lot of firms are operating then obviously each firm will get the chance to capture small market share. On the other hand, in markets where there are few firms, like oligopoly, or let's say monopoly, where there's only one firm, right, or one big firm, right, each firm will have bigger market share, right? So what you need to understand, that larger organizations are generally found in markets with lesser competition, right, and vice versa, right? Simply copy and have fewer firms compared to perfect competition and monopolistic. Easy, we got on this, right? Okay, now this being said, we'll move forward. Now we have to compare that how larger organizations are better in terms of providing for consumer needs, and similarly how smaller companies might be better in providing for consumer needs, right? Now, simply speaking, what you have to do, benefits of smaller organizations, right, slash perfect competition slash monopolistic competition, right? So this is how I want you to think about it. Are you following me, right? And then we will talk about versus, right? So then we'll talk about benefits of larger organization slash oligopoly, right? So as I did tell you that there are obviously benefits whenever such a statement is provided, you will see that there are two sides of the argument. And for these questions, you have to discuss both sides. You have to discuss both sides. So this is basically what the question is asking for. What are the benefits of smaller organization slash perfect competition slash monopolistic competition versus benefits of larger organization slash monopoly slash monopoly slash oligopoly, right? We good on this? Okay. Now, this being said, let's first talk about smaller organizations, right? Okay. Now, what benefits do you expect smaller organizations to provide, right? So the first one would be more firms, meaning more options for the consumers to choose between. Brands choose between. Does it make sense, right? Okay. Then another thing is there is more intense competition when there are therefore can expect lower prices. This is making sense, right? So there's more intense competition when there are multiple firms and therefore consumers can expect lower prices. Easy, right? Okay. Another advantage of markets with smaller firms like perfect competition that such markets are more economically efficient. What do we mean by economically efficient, right? Then you have to explain PC, like PC is, I'm referring to PC as perfect competition. PC is both and relatively efficient. Is it making sense, right? Okay. Now, this being said, Preet, are you following me, right? Okay. Now, the question was asking us that larger organizations face no competition and there's no choice. Small competitive businesses are better means of providing for consumer needs. What I said is, how we will answer this question is basically we will compare the benefits of larger companies with the benefits of smaller companies. Now, when we think of smaller companies, this means that the market has a couple of companies. That's why each company has a small market share and therefore the size of each company is small. Now, that being said, what type of markets will have smaller companies? Perfect competition or monopolistic competition. And on the other hand, what type of companies will have which markets will have larger companies with more market share, oligopoly or monopoly, right? Then what we did was I said that you will start identifying advantages of, you can start off with any one, larger or smaller, but in either case you will identify benefits and then explain the benefits of smaller and larger companies, right? So the three benefits that we have identified for smaller companies so far, that there are more companies, more brands, and therefore consumers have more choice. Then there is more competition. When there are multiple smaller firms, there's more intense competition between firms and every firm is trying to attract more customers. Therefore, they're willing to offer more discounts, which means lower prices for consumers. Then another thing is that these markets, like perfect competition, is economically efficient. Now, what it means to be economically efficient, that's what you need to explain. That means productively efficient, which means they produce at lower cost, right? So if I have to put it down like this, productive efficiency refers to producing at lowest possible cost for benefit of which is then transferred to of which is then transferred to consumers lower prices. Right? Is this making sense? Right? So that's what productive efficiency is. Then when we talk about allocative efficiency refers to some goods, services, used in quantities, right? That's what allocative efficiency means. And businesses are allocatively efficient means they produce desirable for an economy over or under production. Is it making sense? Right? So why is it beneficial? Why is it beneficial for consumers that businesses are economically efficient? So the first thing that we talked about, that it's beneficial for companies, it's beneficial for consumers, sorry, if their companies are economically efficient. Why? Because then that means that they will be both productively and allocatively efficient. Productive efficiency means that they will be producing at the lowest possible cost, which means that if cost is low, then that is transferred, the benefit of that is transferred to consumers in terms of lower prices, which obviously is a big advantage for consumers. On the other hand, if companies are allocatively efficient, this means that they are producing goods that are most wanted in optimal quantities. They're producing goods and services that are most wanted and in optimal quantities, and therefore there will be neither any overproduction or underproduction of that product, right? So these are some main advantages of smaller companies, but this is obviously we also have to talk about benefits of larger organizations, right? Now, when we think of larger organizations, let's talk about the advantages that larger organizations provide to consumers, right? So the first one could be with more investment, right? Larger more expensive and technologically sophisticated products, and I'll give you some examples, which smaller companies cannot produce. Now think about this. If you remember, yesterday we were talking about this, and I mentioned that larger companies have more investment, like in oligopoly markets. Why there are few firms? Because it requires huge investment, right? So if you think of markets like oil and gas, where you have to extract oil and refine oil and all that, right? So that requires huge investment, and smaller companies, you can't expect smaller companies to operate in that market, right? So that's the first thing. So obviously then in those markets, what type of companies you need? You need larger companies, because if larger companies do not exist, then it would mean that those markets will not exist in the first place, right? Because you can't expect a smaller company to extract oil and refine oil and all that, given the investment it requires and technology it requires, right? Similarly, for telecommunication businesses, like the cellular networks that you use in your country, that we use in our country, right? There are few large firms. Why? Because that again requires a lot of investment and all that, right? And if we don't have larger companies, then there would be no firm to take up and provide those products to consumers. So that's first advantage. Then another thing, so larger companies from economies of scale, which means their average, right? Average decreases as good for can benefit consumers in and this can benefit consumers in terms of lower prices. Preet, are you following me? Right? Okay. In terms of lower prices. Okay, that's another major advantage of larger organizations. Moreover, larger companies with more funds can invest in, now this is very important, research and development, which is often needed in many industries to make new and innovative products like pharmaceutical products, right? So think about this. Another advantage of larger organizations is that they have more funds and therefore they can do more research and development. And with that happening, they can produce products that are really wanted. Um, a COVID vaccination that we're using in the world, that's a good example of, larger companies putting in a lot of research and development soon after COVID hit. And I think within 8 or 10 months, the world discovered COVID vaccination. Right? So that was due to huge funds that were poured into that thing. Otherwise, you can't expect smaller companies with limited funds or investment to be able to do that, right? So these are some major advantages of larger companies. Easy, we're good on this, right? So Preet, this is the type of discussion that you need to do. This is the type of discussion that you need to do. And then towards the end, expected to summarize their arguments and their answer, right? So towards the end, you will be expected to summarize your arguments and sum up your answer, right? Right, continuous format. I mean, what do you mean by continuous format? Like you will be making different paragraphs, but as I mentioned before, that you technically the idea of paragraph is simple, right? So every time you're writing a new point, you can write a new paragraph. So think about this. So you will be writing a couple of paragraphs on smaller organizations, that what are their benefits. So perhaps this first point could be uh, one paragraph, then the second point, which is the second advantage of smaller organization, this could be another paragraph, and then this third point could be another paragraph, and so on and so forth. And similarly for the larger organizations as well. So there is no limit on how many paragraphs you want to write. And then in the end, the final conclusion that you're giving, evaluation that you're giving, that could be another paragraph. So that's how it works. Is it making sense? Breathe, right? But I mean, there should be a flow. So if that's what you asked, then there should be a kind of flow. So the examiner should know, because these essays sometimes get very theoretical. So it's always good to give an examiner some sort of idea that how you are structuring your answer. Right? So you start off with some 2 or 3 lines introduction that, in this question, what we will do, we will compare the benefits of larger organizations and with benefits of smaller organizations to determine whether consumer needs are better met in larger organizations or smaller organizations. So this 1 or 2 line introduction will give examiner an idea of what you're trying to do. Write in your answer, and then you can start off with either of the two, and you can say that smaller organizations exist in market structures like perfect competition and monopolistic competition, and they have a couple of benefits for consumers, such as, and then you can number your arguments or just put in paragraph, firstly, secondly, moreover, furthermore, things like that, right? So after you have completed all the benefits of smaller organization, then you say, however, there are some benefits of larger organizations as well, which includes more investment, meaning more research and development, benefit from economies of scale, so on and so forth. And then you will say towards the end, right, that, uh, you know, how would you end it, right? There are, so this is how you can write a summary. I'm just giving you an example. There are benefits of which um, varies, therefore you can not always refer as more beneficial than one. Preet, are you following me? Right now, just pay attention as to how I'm summarizing or evaluating my answer, right? So there are benefits of both small and larger organizations, and therefore we cannot always refer to either one as more beneficial than the other one. Some markets demand firms size to be larger as they require more investment, uh, technology, and therefore larger firms with more investments are a better fit to those markets, whereas and smaller companies better for some markets where products are relatively simple and homogeneous, like agricultural markets, and therefore more smaller firms, consumers get more choice and prices. This is making sense. So that's all about it, right? So this is how you have given your conclusion. So in the end, you have said that it's not always that smaller firms will be beneficial or larger firms will be beneficial. They both have their own advantages and disadvantages, right? And it totally depends on the market, that what type of firm will be a better fit to it, right? So some markets, like I gave you examples of oil and gas, or let's say telecommunication industries, where investment requirement is high, so larger firms are more beneficial. On the other hand, other markets where products are relatively simple and easy to produce and homogeneous, then in those markets, smaller firms are better fit because they provide more choice, they provide more efficiency, and so on. Got it, Preet? So is everything clear? Can we move to the next question? Right. Are we good? Kindly do confirm me so that we can move to the next question. Right. Not large firms. Right. Okay. Perfect. Great. Large firms necessarily become monopolistic. Monopolies adopt practices that are undesirable. Therefore, large firms should be regulated by governments. Discuss whether there is any truth in this argument. Now, think about this. There's just one simple statement, not simple perhaps. There's just this one statement, and this is a 25 marks question, right? I mean, so just imagine, as I mentioned yesterday, that the content of your essay questions will be very similar from one essay question to another essay question, but the wording could be very different. The way you have to analyze could be very different, so you have to understand the statement very accurately so that you can answer it in best possible way, right? Now think about this. It says, so it's basically made up of three statements. Large firms necessarily become monopolistic. It says that large firms get monopolistic powers, like a lot of control over the market, get to capture a lot of market share. That is what monopolistic means, right? Monopolistic behavior or monopolistic characteristics. So first thing, it says large firms will always or necessarily become monopolistic. Then second statement says monopolies adopt practices that are undesirable. So the question wants you to discuss that what are some practices that monopolies adopt which are undesirable. not very favorable for the society, and so on and so forth. And then it says, therefore, large firms should be regulated by governments. So government should regulate those large firms, right? Discuss whether there is any truth in this argument. So it wants you to analyze and, discuss around this statement, right? So first of all, three statements you have to answer for this question, right? So the first one would be, large organizations become listed. First thing, right? Second thing is, right, monopolies always adopt undesirable practices, right? Second question. And then, should governments regulate monopolies? That's the third one, right? So these are the three questions that need to be answered. Do large firms always become monopolies? Do monopolies always adopt undesirable practices? And should governments regulate monopolies? These are the three questions that need to be answered, right? So let's first talk about the first one, right? So for the first one, what you need to write, or let's say, in fact, I can just add it down over here, right? Okay. So this was the first statement that we have to comment on, right? Okay. Do organizations always, large organizations always become monopolistic? Yes. If they have captured a lot of market share, then they would get unfair power consumers, like they can manipulate market supply, and through that they can influence market price of the products, right? Okay. Now the first thing that I've mentioned over here, that the question was saying, do large organizations always become monopolistic? And what I've written over here, that yes, if larger firms have captured a lot of market share, which means that now they're supplying a big chunk of the market, then what they can do, that they can easily manipulate market supply. Think about this. So if you think of Coke and Pepsi, right? These are really big brands, and I think trillion-dollar companies overall across the globe, right? So in soft drink market, Coke and Pepsi are owning a lot of brands, right? Not only Coke and Pepsi, they have multiple brands, they have juices, they have blah, 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 and all that, right? Now they supply a big chunk of the market. So they control a big market supply, right? And if they reduce their market supply or manipulate market supply, then they can really influence the market prices, right? So that's what's dangerous and not desirable for consumers, right? But no as well, right? So first you said how large firms could be monopolistic, but then you're also explaining the other side of the argument. But perhaps not always larger organizations monopoly, since there could be smaller firms operating along with larger firms, and therefore they can provide more choice to consumers, right? Okay, now think about this, students. On the opposite end, what did I mention? That perhaps not always larger organizations form a monopoly, since there could be, right? Since there could be smaller firms operating with larger firms, and therefore they can provide more choice to consumers. Are you getting me? So that provides more choice to consumers, right? Okay. And obviously that means that consumers can choose between larger or smaller companies depending upon their needs, depending upon what type of product they want, and so on and so forth, right? So not always larger companies will become a monopoly, right? Okay, now the second question right? The second statement that the question wanted us to comment on was this one, right? That is, do monopolies always adopt undesirable practice? Now, in this, you have to comment on how this section, student is expected to comment on how monopolies are economically undesirable practices. Think about this. What do we mean by undesirable? Are economically efficient, and how through that they can exploit consumers. Now, the second statement here was referring to the idea that monopolies are, they always adopt, they are not very desirable for consumers because they adopt unfair or undesirable practices, right? Now, what are those undesirable practices that monopolies adopt? That's what you need to comment on, right? So first thing that you need to mention, that how monopolies are economically inefficient. And this is the same thing, so I will not repeat what we discussed early on, right, in the above question, that how monopolies are productively and allocatively inefficient. If you want to make a graph, right, explanation of how monopolies are productively inefficient, right? A diagram, right? Again, so I will say the same thing, since the question is not saying, to make or explain with the help of a diagram, so you may not want to make one, but obviously if you do make the correct one, you will get some credit for that, right? So I always recommend my students, because the graphs are not that difficult and we have done it a couple of times in our classes, so it's always good to make a suitable graph, a relevant graph to explain what you are writing, right? So that's always helpful, right? So explanation of how monopolies are productively and allocatively inefficient, a diagram could help, right? And then linking it to that inefficient problem for consumers, like charging higher prices for products, right? Charging higher prices for products, not producing at optimal levels. Do you remember this or not? Because I did tell you that monopolies are always allocatively inefficient. And what does it mean to be allocatively inefficient? That they don't produce up till the level which is desirable. They always underproduce, because you would remember that the profit maximization output of monopolies is much lower than allocatively efficient output level, right? So they are underproducing, which means that lesser products are available for consumers, and therefore their demands might not be met, and so on and so forth, right? There always be less than demanded. There would be less products available are demanded by the consumers. Easy, we got on this? Any confusion so far? Right? So that's why this is how we have explained that monopolies adopt undesirable practices because they are economically inefficient. Productively inefficient means that they are producing at higher cost. When they're producing at higher cost, it means that they will be charging higher prices, because who will pay for higher cost at the end of the day? Consumers. So they will charge higher prices to their customers. That's a problem. Secondly, they will be underproducing, which means that they are allocatively inefficient, and therefore, being allocatively inefficient means that underproducing, consumers do not get as much products as much they want. So that's another problem, right? So, and this is what you have explained in this second statement. Now, the third and the last statement that the question presents: should governments regulate monopolies? Now, in this, you have to comment on how regulating monopolies could be a good thing, right? Should governments regulate monopolies? Yes. First we'll talk about yes, then we'll talk about no, and so on and so forth, right? Should government regulate monopolies? Yes, with regulations prices can charge limit their ability to exploit consumers as then be able to overcharge consumers. Secondly, right? So that's what I mentioned. Just give me a second. Let me write this first. Similarly, having regulations related to product quality and the quantity which has to be reduced uh, monopolies output uh, efficient output level, right? Right. So think about this. Should government regulate monopolies? Now, what we have written over here. So first thing that I said, yes, right? And obviously we have to explain that why government should regulate monopolies. So the answer to that is fairly simple. Yes, with regulations around how much prices monopolies can charge would limit their ability to exploit consumers, as then they would not be able to overcharge consumers. So that's the first thing, right? So government can make regulations around how much prices they can charge and so on and so forth. Similarly, having regulations related to product quality and quantity which has to be produced would bring monopolies output closer towards economically efficient output level, right? So I did tell you that monopolies are allocatively inefficient, which means that they never produce at the level where price is equals to marginal cost, because where price is equals to marginal cost, that is allocatively efficient output level, and they are producing less than that, right? They are producing at the level where they maximize their profit, which is MC equals to MR, right? Right. Okay. Okay. Fine. So we are just wrapping this up. So after you've explained all of this, then in no, perhaps you can say these companies do benefit. Just give me 1 or 2 minutes. These companies, sorry, no, because larger organizations are beneficial consumers in terms of able to invest more in research and development and and can offer lower prices in terms of economy of scale, right? Are you getting me? Right? So this things being said, you can say that monopoly should not always be regulated. So this is how you will write answer to your question. Okay, so let's stop it for today, Preet, and tomorrow we'll continue from here, right? So I'll see you tomorrow then. Take care and have a good night, right? Okay, bye.